Do you guys want to hear something completely insane? Yes? Okay, because you're going to have to hear it anyway. My client Cal and I ranked a community with just 25 members in the top 100 health communities on Skool, a highly competitive category. We surpassed communities with hundreds, even thousands of members, and reached as high as rank number 67 and are currently still on the ascent. The point is, we know a thing or two about engagement on Skool, and today I'll share some of the tactics we use to keep our members active and engaged in the communities we manage. My name is Marlon, and I run a free Skool community called Community Builders, where I help YouTubers build their Skool communities. I've helped YouTuber Calram become a top 1% community builder on Skool, with 4 Skool communities that have made more than $150,000 in under 2 years. In your Skool community, the features that strengthen communication are the ones that you're going to want to invest your time, effort, and money into, because communication builds community. It's literally in the name. So let's focus on optimizing communication between members on Skool so that we can encourage a sense of connection and avoid creating a dead community environment. To this end, we'll explore together live calls, in-person events, and perhaps more importantly, something called MGC. A simple rule of thumb is that if a community activity involves FaceTime, it's good for the community. When I say FaceTime, I'm not referring to the iPhone app, though if you want to FaceTime your community members, then by all means they'll probably enjoy it. By FaceTime, I'm referring to the activity of conversing with one or many human beings while being able to see their faces. That is, through in-person and live call events. Let's look more closely at these events, starting with in-person ones. It almost goes without saying, but in-person events are king. As fun and fulfilling as online communities can be, they will never match the depth of connection that real-life in-person interactions provide. Speaking from experience, in-person events are the fastest way to build meaningful connections. Stories are shared, spontaneous conversations unfold, inside jokes emerge, and even off-topic discussions contribute to a strong sense of relatability, all in a short period of time. While these interactions can happen in online Skool communities, text-based exchanges will never match the depth or speed of connection that comes from actually talking to people face to face. That said, you can have the best of both worlds by creating a hybrid experience that blends a virtual community with real-life meetups through in-person events. These events can take many forms. They can be short and simple, like a one-day hike or a group dinner at a great restaurant, or they can be longer and more immersive, such as a multi-day retreat or a week-long trip to an exciting destination. Live calls, on the other hand, are the closest approximation to an in-person experience and cause less friction because they're not location dependent, making them way more accessible to the majority of your members than in-person events, and therefore a great feature to have in your Skool community. Now, in-person events and live calls may seem like obvious social elements to include in a community, but many community owners fail to prioritize features that have face-to-face interaction. And there are reasons for this, which I'll explain. Despite all the good that live calls and in-person events bring to a community, they are not without their problems. Chief among these problems are the logistics involved in organizing synchronous events. For in-person events, the main constraint isn't timing, but rather the friction of attending due to geographic distance and the associated costs. For example, if you host events in the US, Americans will naturally find it easier to attend than Europeans. That said, some non-local members will still go out of their way to attend such events. Back in September 2024, my YouTuber client Cal and I hosted an in-person event called a Growth House, where some of Cal's most dedicated members and subscribers spent a week working, hanging out, and engaging in activities together. Despite being a minority among attendees, 3 Europeans literally flew to the US just to be there. So it is possible for non-local members to attend in-person events, but it certainly comes at a high friction cost that not all members are willing to make. As for live calls, beyond the obvious fact that your members all lead individual lives and have differing schedules, there's always the insurmountable problem of time zones. There's no getting around the fact that if you have an international community, which most creators do, you're going to run into time zone problems, meaning that there will always be a percentage of your Skool community members that will never be able to comfortably attend any of your live call events due to where they live and by extension the time zone they reside in. For some members, your calls will always be too early and for others, your calls will always be too late. That being said, I will teach you how my client Cal and I mitigate these problems to the best of our abilities. The most diplomatic thing you can do is to have the community agree upon a time and date that, on average, works for the majority of members. You'll have to accept the fact that there will always be members who may want to attend these events, but will never comfortably be able to do so due to time zone constraints. This is where recordings come in as the next best thing to attending a live call. It's not a perfect replacement by any means, nor live nor interactive, but it's the only compromise that allows members to feel on some level that they've attended these live call events. To get everyone to determine a time to meet, when we first started Cal's community KCC, we made use of this free-to-use website called When to Meet, which collects your members' time zones and outputs the common areas of availability, at which point you can make a decision on what date and time to host your live call events at. It's for these reasons that in-person events and live calls aren't always the priority feature of many Skool communities. As powerful as they can be in terms of facilitating connection amongst members, they're logistically challenging to organize as a result of time zones and geography. However, that doesn't mean that they're not worth implementing though. Here are the action steps. Host live calls at times that work best for the majority of your members. Use When to Meet to figure out when to host your community's live calls. And once a week is a good call frequency to start at in a paid Skool community. In the first community that I manage, we started with 2 to 3 a week, and it was a bit too much for members and management to keep up with on a consistent basis. Remember the lesson on overwhelm because it applies to the duration and quantity of live calls as well. Sprinkle in-person events here and there if you can. For example, Cal and I plan on hosting at least one big in-person event a year. More importantly, go all in on the communication channels that the majority of your members prefer. No matter how sound all this advice may be, your members should ultimately decide which channels of communication they want to engage with in your community. This is why we commit to research and development. If most of your members want more in-person events, make them a core feature of your Skool community. If they prefer live calls, double down on those instead. Some communities may not even want in-person and live call events and prefer to use instead the community forum, posts, comments, and replies. So if that's what your members engage with most, just lean into that. Speaking of which, posts, comments, and replies are all built into how communication works on Skool. They don't include FaceTime, but they still have the power to build a sense of community at a slower pace, which isn't necessarily a bad thing since communities take time to grow anyways. Virtual relationships, much like relationships in the real world, cannot be forced. Rather, they unfold organically over time. So, having brought up posts, comments, and replies, let's talk about the most important part of this section, MGC. MGC stands for Member-Generated Content. On the Skool platform, member-generated content typically comes in the form of posts, comments, and replies, but isn't necessarily limited to these 3 pillars of engagement, as you'll soon find out. Member-generated content is important to us because it doesn't cost management any time, money, or effort to create. This means the bulk of the content in your community is generated by members, which is awesome. For example, in KCC, one of the communities I manage, it's not uncommon for members to share high-quality guides on health and nutrition on a consistent basis. Now, the community owner, Cal, could have spent all his time researching and posting health guides himself, but thanks to MGC, he doesn't have to do all this at all because members are more than happy to generate their own content. Moreover, when members contribute consistently over a long enough time frame, they develop a sense of belonging and ownership in the community. To illustrate this sense of ownership, in KCC, the oldest Skool community I manage, now approaching its 2-year mark, members have started proactively DMing me with their ideas for the future of the community and how they're willing to help for free. They also share any concerns they have about the community's health. And so you could see an example in this DM exchange of a member reaching out to me with his concerns about the community and and his goals for the community as well, what he wants to see in it, which is a really cool thing to have. Think about this for a second. These members don't technically or legally own this community. On paper, they're just paying members who show up, engage, and enjoy the space. And yet, here they are voluntarily writing in-depth messages, sometimes multiple paragraphs long, to management with ideas, concerns, and aspirations for the community's future. That's powerful. This kind of engagement gives us real-time insight into what members are thinking and hands us, on a silver platter, all the ideas and fixes needed to improve the community day after day. And again, for free. Some members even want to help implement these ideas just to see them come to life faster. And because of this, we've now reached a point in KCC where members are organizing their own live calls and even going so far as to create member-made courses. How amazing is that? Think about all the work these members have willingly taken off our shoulders. And so you could see in this DM exchange example, a member's reaching out to me because he wants to start a KCC casino night call. And over here, a member's organizing an entire member-made course. The community owner no longer needs to create content, write posts, host calls, or even make courses. These contributions from Cal are now a matter of when he wants to add new value rather than an obligation to. That's a powerful position to be in as a community owner or builder. Imagine running a community where whether or not you choose to post, host a call, or create a course, it doesn't matter because your members are already doing it. This is the power of a bottom-up community culture instead of a top-down one, where the owner is the sole authority or guru creating the posts, calls, and courses. And to visualize that, this is what you want. So you could see these colored circles are your members. This is you, but there's interaction between your members and yourself, and it's a web that's created. This is the community effect visualized. However, this is what you don't want. This is a top-down guru model where the only link is between the members and yourself. And once those sever, they're gone because they don't have any other connections between each other. Unlike static content like a course, which remains unchanged unless a new edition is released, MGC evolves in real time. This guarantees that posts in your Skool community stay relevant to current trends and developments within your community's niche. I've seen this firsthand while managing multiple health-focused communities. In the health space, new research emerges constantly that challenges old ideas and introduces new ones. If our members relied solely on pre-recorded health courses, some of the content would potentially become outdated or require further context and revision, which creates lots of work for management to take care of. But with member-generated content, the communities I manage remain on the cutting edge of health because members cover all new advancements in their posts, comments, and replies. MGC can also help attract new members. By promoting the quality of your content, that is showcasing some of your community's best posts and interactions to your audience, prospective members will naturally want to join to read this content for themselves. Not only that, but they'll also feel inspired to join and contribute their own content. This creates an evergreen content engine where the only inputs you need to manage are the quantity and quality of the members that you onboard. And an example of this promotion is just simply taking a screen grab or copying and pasting, of course with the permission of the member, a member's post into a YouTube community post, for example, and sharing that with your audience, with your YouTube audience, as an example of what kind of posts are made in your community. And that's going to create a sense of FOMO, a sense of fear of missing out in your audience members that haven't yet joined your Skool community. And so that's a way of attracting new members into your community from your YouTube audience. Member-generated content also gives you testimonials. Hear me out. When members share their success stories or progress in a post, for example, in a wins forum category, they're not just benefiting from the status boost that comes with sharing a win. They're also providing social proof and inspiration to others. So why keep these wins hidden inside your private Skool community? Pick the best ones and repurpose them for marketing. Use them in videos or YouTube community posts to showcase successes from your community. And so you can see an example of that here in this post. Member-generated content can also reactivate inactive members. Assuming your members have their notifications enabled for your Skool community, member-generated content helps bring back inactive members. When they receive notifications for new posts in your Skool community, curiosity may kick in, prompting them to return and re-engage. And so you can see an example of this here. A member was busy, but he returned because he had his notifications enabled. That was a comprehensive overview of the benefits of member-generated content, but there is, however, one downside that MGC can have. If you've made it this far into the video, you're already familiar with this problem. If you guessed overwhelm, then you guessed right. Too much member-generated content can lead to burnout on the part of the members creating the content and a sense of overwhelm on the part of the members who have to catch up with all that content. For example, when my client Cal and I launched a Skool community called Legion, we saw 10,892 activities in a single day. And so you could see that day right there when we got started, 10,892 activities, which is a lot. To put that into perspective, a Skool community with 3,000 activities per day is already considered highly active. At launch, we'd essentially tripled that benchmark, and it showed. The forum feed was a waterfall, overflowing with new and unread posts. At the time, I was the only community admin in Legion, meaning I had to read every single one of these posts, a process that took hours. I imagine that for those daring enough to keep up, it took hours of their time as well. However, for the majority of members, this flood of activity was likely overwhelming, especially for newcomers to the Skool platform. Not only were they learning the ropes of a new website, but they were also hit with a massive wave of member-generated content right from the start. Fortunately, over time, the daily activity naturally tapered down to a more manageable level. The takeaway here is that the only real big concern with member-generated content is having too much of it. Luckily for you, this is a problem that you're likely not going to experience anytime soon, nor are you going to experience it for long periods of time. In the case of Legion, this uptick in MGC was a result of a successful launch campaign with lots of hype leading to plenty of excited members making all sorts of contributions. That launch hype, no matter how amazing your community is, will eventually settle down at some point. That was the theory surrounding member-generated content. Now let's get into the action steps. How do you get your members to create MGC? An easier way of wording this question is, how can you get members to engage in your Skool community with minimal input from you, management? For the purposes of answering this question, let's explore KCC, the community I manage that has the highest quality MGC. That's not to say that the other communities I manage don't have high quality member generated content, but by and large, KCC is the group that features the most high quality MGC. By highest quality MGC, I'm referring to the semi-subjective quality of the posts, comments, and replies that are made by members in your Skool community. High quality MGC is relevant to your group's subject matter or niche, is interesting or novel or insightful, inspires discussion, is well written in the language of the community, for example, English if you have an English community. So let's consider the opposite to help put things into further perspective. That is low quality MGC. Low quality MGC is unrelated to the subject matter or niche of your Skool community, is uninteresting or unoriginal or uninformative, doesn't inspire any discussion, and is poorly written in the language of the community, for example, poor English if you have an English community. Getting members to create high quality MGC starts before you even onboard members into your community. To a large extent, high quality MGC is a function of attracting quality leads to your Skool community. In this case, let's define a quality lead as a prospective member who shows promise in terms of being able to create high quality MGC when they eventually join your community. Luckily for you, as a YouTuber, you excel at capturing the attention of your audience and directing it towards your offers. So most of the setup in terms of attracting and onboarding quality leads into your Skool community is already done. The only difference here is that if you want to truly vet for the right kinds of members for your Skool community, it would be wise to introduce a step before they join. This step involves asking prospective members a few questions before granting them access. Even before I started working with my client on his community KCC, its owner Cal had already implemented this process. For example, long before launching his community, he set up a basic Google form to screen potential members. He would then review their responses to determine who would be a good fit for his soon-to-be launched group. In terms of what to ask your prospective members, that really boils down to who your audience is, and more importantly, who are you looking to attract from your audience? To this end, a prompt such as, "What behaviors does my ideal community member exhibit?" will help you narrow down the possibilities in terms of what questions to ask in your application form. In terms of setting up your application form, there are many tools to this end, such as Google Forms, Typeform, and even Skool's membership questions plugin, which allow you to ask your prospects questions before they join so that you can see if they're a good fit or not based on your subjective criteria of what an ideal Skool community member is. And so you can see Skool has a built-in membership questions function here, or plugin as they call it. Bear in mind that a form will create friction in terms of people applying to your community, which is either a good or bad thing depending on the goals you have for your community. For example, maybe you do want prospects to go through a long and detailed application form just to see who's really motivated to join your group. Or maybe you want a large number of members in your group, in which case you either shorten your application form or you don't have one at all. These are important details for you to figure out and experiment with. Once you've vetted for the right kinds of members and they joined your Skool community, what do you do next? You highlight member behavior, and more specifically, you highlight the kinds of member-generated content that you, as the community owner, want to see more of from the members in your community. How is this done? Number one, a member makes a piece of MGC that you highly approve of. When you're just starting out your community, it'll be your job to post the type of content you want to see to set an example for members that they can model. Number two, you then temporarily highlight this piece of MGC by pinning it to the top of the community feed. And number three, the pinned member gains status, and the other members who want that status will try to make posts of equal quality or more so that they may have their post pinned next. Whoever has the next greatest piece of MGC gets pinned, and the cycle continues. Simple and effective. And so you can see an example of a pinned member post here, but there's one problem. You can only pin a maximum of up to 3 posts at any given time to the top of your Skool community feed, as you can see here in this image. This is a problem because what happens when you have too many good pieces of MGC that you'd like to highlight to the rest of your community? Moreover, what happens when you want a number of important announcements or key posts to remain indefinitely pinned and not be replaced by these highlighted member posts? As you can see, 2 out of 3 of these pinned posts are actually management-made announcements. And so there's 1 member-made post. So what happens if you want to keep these management announcements up there, but include or pin rather more member-made posts? Well, luckily for you, there are 3 solutions that I have experience with. Number 1, highlight those posts in a single post of your own that hyperlinks to the member-made posts in question. You can then pin that single post instead of having to pin 2 or 3 member-made posts. This also allows you to highlight as many member-made posts as you desire. When I started managing and building at the community KCC, we did this a lot. Every week, in fact. At the time, we called this tradition the weekly best posts. And as the name implies, we'd simply highlight in a single management-made post a number of member-made posts that were deserving of highlighting to praise the authors and to also inspire other members to make similar quality posts of their own. And so you can see an example of that here, where we're simply hyperlinking to the member posts. And in this case, we were able to include in a single pin post 4 member-made posts. The second solution involves pinning these posts to a Hall of Fame classroom course module where they can be easily found and enjoyed for a longer time, since they're not going to get lost down the forum feed when new posts are made. And so you can see an example of that here. We've just created a course in the classroom section, and we just pin all the high quality member-made posts to it. And that's what that looks like here inside of the course. Number 3 involves creating an entire forum category in Skool to store posts of note. That way, all a member has to do is enter that category and they'll see all the high quality pieces of MGC stored there. This is something my client and I do in his community, Legion. So you just create a forum category here, and we call it best posts, and you just switch the member-made posts that you want to highlight over to this one by changing the category on it and making this category management run only, meaning that members can't actually make a fresh post of their own in this category unless they make one in another category and you, management, manually switch that post over. The next thing you're going to want to do to inspire the creation of MGC in your Skool community is to operate as if your members actually owned your community. The implications of approaching your members in this way are such that you begin to treat your members as equally involved in the creative process of maintaining and improving the experience that is your Skool community. By handing over the reins to your members, so to speak, and treating them as if they have a stake in your community's health, which they do, by the way, you're creating an environment where members feel free to give insight on how the community should evolve, and more importantly, what they're willing to do to make those ideas of theirs come true. This is what has allowed my client and I to build a community built by the community, where members are hosting live calls and organizing and creating their own member-made courses and even in-person events. So here are the action steps from this section. Number 1, encourage and promote activities that involve FaceTime in your community, that is live calls and in-person events. Number 2, encourage member-generated content. And if you want high-quality MGC in your Skool community, number 1, vet your members. Number 2, reward good behavior, that is reward good MGC. And number 3, let your members take the reins. And lastly, double down on the preferred communication channels. Commit to research and development to identify which communication channels, for example, live calls, in-person events, forum posts, etc., your members prefer to engage with. Prioritize those to maximize engagement and avoid wasting effort on low impact features.